Okay, 14 opens, 1 clicks. Alright, so somebody clicked on it. So let's start talking about this. Electromagnet. Alright. So I already mentioned where this book, well, I mentioned that I started in 2013. I didn't mention why I started writing it, and in interviews I've given different answers. So I think, the most honest answer is probably that I turned 40 in 2013, and I had tried many times in the past to write books, and I guess some combination of being busy with my day job and busy with my family responsibilities, I just never really committed to it. So the decision I made then, which was sort of, I guess, a midlife crisis type of decision, was that I'm just going to spend an hour per day. And it ended up being, uh, I wanted to do an hour per day. What it ended up being was something every day. So it's not always an hour. Sometimes it's 5 minutes. Um, but oh, by the way, I see there is a comment on the comment box, but it's just hi. So hi, Lorraine Ralph. Um, so the commitment I made ended up being that I'm going to do something every day. Um, and because Electromagnate had multiple artists, the something was often as easy as checking my email, looking at some pages that someone submit, and commenting on them. I see the graphic on my screen hasn't updated in a while. Um, I'm not. Let me just update that right now because it seems like it's frozen. I hope that other people there can see it. All right. Seems like it's moving now. All right. And in fact, it's not that far behind. It's like 2 seconds behind. So if you comment something, I will see it. All right. So it's called Electromagnate, the Book of Rebel Nations. So right off the bat, does that sound familiar? There's something called Book of Revelations in the Bible. It kind of sounds like that. And I don't know when I first came up with this idea, the Book of Rebel Nations, but I ended up sticking with that, not only because it sounds like Book of Revelations, which sounds like some big like apocalypse, world in doubt type of thing, but I also, what is the common threat these days? Like back then, I guess there was like a flood with the time of Noah, and that was a big thing. They sometimes talk about, alien invasions, which to me sounds like kind of silly because either aliens they were either always here or they're never going to get here. Like the odds of them showing up during our lifetime just seems like silly, unless they were always here. But now let's get back to why I'm saying rebel nations is, to me, the threat is merging of nations, because it's like, think about the way a free economy works. You have some companies do a good job and some companies do a bad job, but they compete against each other, and the customers go to the company that's doing a good job, and then things just keep getting better. And that's the way evolution works too. They have like, survival of the fittest, and people adapt to the environment, or I say people, but animals or anything. It's kind of the way it works. But if all the governments merge together into one, like, let's not go there yet. Let's say, so you have a bunch of different governments, well, then different places in the world you can go, you can choose where you go. Those countries can compete. The way countries compete, become more successful, and the countries have to compete against each other to make a better country for the citizens. The way companies compete against each other to create better services for the customers. But if it's all one big country, like a planet-wide country, and that goes sour, well, then what do? Then it's like, Star Wars. You like the rebels fighting the Galactic Empire, which is probably hopeless. So to me, the Book of Rebel Nations, the title sort of became the people, it's not really in the book this way. In the book, I'll get to that in a minute, but I like the title. I like the title because it makes me think about the nations that rebel against the global, you know, hegemony or whatever it's called, because that leads to freedom. Whether those countries are better or worse than the global hegemon, at least there's some other option. Because maybe there's only, let's say, 4 countries, which that would be quite bad. You probably like there to be like hundreds, but let's say there are only 4, you know, and the big one was terrible. And no, the big one was oppressive, and the fourth place one was terrible. Maybe people went to the fourth place one just as a protest against the big one, and it got better. So in the book, it's they're trying to close this circuit, and the last holdout is Malta, and it's specifically like a company in Malta and a CEO of that company, and he's holding out not really because he wants to save the world, but because there's the biggest payout for him in being the last holdout. It's a weird. There's a lot going on in this book, and I'm not even sure that you can get everything that was in my head when I wrote it just by reading this book. And I actually, at one point, had plans to go into more topics than what are covered in the book, but I ended up doing different graphic novels. So there will probably be a sequel to Electromagnate at one point, but there isn't one currently. Um, and the reason why the CEO is this tech company CEO is that at one point the book was a little different, and this is the chapter. Let's just get into it, and I'll explain it when I get to the chapter. But basically, it was going to be more like episodic, and it would be like the tech company would come out with some new idea that they were trying to sell to the world, and then that idea would get exposed, and that would be like the structure for each, comic issue. But then, that's not the direction it stayed in. So let's just get into it. All right. So one last thing. I'm John Rapp. You can see my name here. I wrote this book. Kostas Pantoulis is the first artist listed because he did the most pages. Anar Barathe did probably, I guess, the second most pages. Yeah, he definitely did the second most pages. But more importantly, Kostas did the main timeline, and Anar did the alternate timeline, and then Santosh did the coloring. I should send this link right now to Kostas and Anar just to let them know that this live stream is happening. So let me just do that before I open the book. Alright, I sent to Kostas. Let me send to Anar, which I'm never sure which email to use for him. Alright, I just invited Kostas and Anar. I don't know if they're awake. Anar is in the same time zone as me, but it's late at night. Kostas is in Greece. I don't know, maybe he woke up for Monday. Santosh is in India. Anyway, I don't know if these guys are going to get this or not. Let's just crack the book open and get started. Starts with a blank page. And then the forward. My friend Pete. He asked me to, he's been doing books for a while, as you can see down here. Ark, Robin Hood, etc. Those are his comic books, but he has a lot of books that are text only. So he asked me to write a foreword on his book like 20 years ago. So when I was doing a book, I know normally they add the foreword like on a second release, but this just comes out with a foreword. I just thought it was fun, especially on a comic book. Um, and then I talk about the plans in the preface. I talk about the plans for an MMO, which is true. That's where the flying packs came from. It was going to be like an MMO. Some people were like had leveled up, and there were these like equivalent of zombies, really, these shadow mares. Anyway, never, it didn't happen. Maybe it will. The closest thing currently is the Electromagnate board game, which NR worked on. So there's the names again. All right, so now here's the first page with some content in it. And it's made to look like it's some old document. It says like, in a series of patents submitted over 100 years ago, Nikola Tesla declared his vision. Tesla's individual submissions made references to each other. Combined together, Tesla's inventions would power a system to control the electromagnetics of Earth as if our planet were a giant programmable electromagnet machine. That's not too far from the truth. Like if you look into it, he did have a lot of patents that were very similar, and if you read them all together, you would think like, oh, this guy was trying to make an interface from which you can control the world. You know, he had some crazy inventions. All right, decades after Tesla's death, construction began worldwide. A matrix of relay towers were planned. The network would be capable of realizing Tesla's transformational design. Nowadays, this is like a common trope, but you have to understand this book came out in 2016. It wasn't so common then, so now people will talk about like, oh, Trump's uncle went through Tesla's papers and he like hid the knowledge or whatever he did. He reviewed it and he reported to, I don't know, the army, let's say. I don't know who he reported to. But anyway, that's like a common meme these days. But when I wrote it in this book, it wasn't. So I guess that idea caught on, even if this book didn't. And then I threw in this idea was like someone's notes added. I don't know who, wherever this document came from, but the notes added at the end. Pyramids and temples in antiquity have been tested and found to hold the same properties that modern engineers built into electromagnet relays. This implies that whatever we're discovering, we're not the first. It's, you know, kind of like an ancient aliens type of concept. But again, this book was like 7 years ago, and the writing started 10 years ago. So these weren't old ideas at the time, but maybe they were. This just says ABC, using these little wagon wheels. I don't know if that's like obvious, but it's like a common theme in my books is to try to create these typesets that are like simple. So like here's another one. The Annandale Comics logo is a 3x3 grid. There's a lot of things you can encode in a 3x3 grid. This is like a wagon wheel. By the way, a 3x3 grid with a binary expression. It's either black or white. And it's the same thing here with the wagon wheels. It got a bunch of spokes, and they're either black or white. So this is just visually like A, B, C, but really there's so many things you can do with this. You can do circuits, you could do math, you could do binary expressions, you could do, there's a lot of things. I'm not going to make the whole lecture about this because we're already 28 minutes in and we haven't gotten to the first page yet. So here's the first chapter cover, at least. It's a shadow mare, but I didn't want to show it completely at this point, so the head is cropped off. The head of this drawing does exist. I think it was Francisco Ruiz who did this image, but then I added all this like dots and I cropped it, and you know, I played with it a little bit. So that's the first look at a shadow mare, though you don't know what you're looking at that point. And then another coding thing is the Elite Agenda logo. there have been so many things that people have seen in this logo. It like looks like a key. It looks like Atlantis. It looks like a bracket. It looks like there's a forum that uses like a real world thing. There's the black and white going on again. There's a list I made somewhere. I don't have it handy, but there's a lot of things that this could look like, and I think I like it that way. I'm not sure it's worth saying that it's only one thing. Also, these bars are like, it's like the white bars are connected to the white triangle and the black bars are connected to the black triangle. It's pretty cool. I think it's a cool logo. And then this forum, there's only one time in the book. It's when you first meet John Parr. He's on one of these forums. That's the only time the forums interact with the main timeline. But they're kind of a way to introduce what concepts are going to be. Like, they're just foreshadowing, just a way to sort of get your mind in the space that's going to match what that chapter is going to be about. So this first chapter is just introduction of of the Shadow Mares, and it was done by Francisco Ruiz again. And I actually wrote like a dozen of these. I could have done a whole series just on Shadow Mares. We ended up only using this Miss Buttermark thing in the book, but it was just, there were a lot of little stories I wrote. Like I said, we ended up only using this one, but the idea from the Shadow Mares was that they're always there, but you don't remember them because they traumatize the victim in such a way that they suppress the memory. So this Miss Buttermark, she gets attacked by the Shadow Mare, and that's seen on the security camera, which gets deleted, but someone puts like a copy on the internet to reveal the truth. And then this in blue is what she reported, which was that she basically blamed this overnight custodian for attacking her when really it was the Shadow Mare. So that's like the story. That's the story of the Shadow Mares, is that we're always like attacking people, but they're never like make it into history because they're too horrifying, that people suppress, and they blame it on something that makes more sense. But now we live in the modern age with cameras, and eventually this information can get out, which in the case it does. It gets out onto the internet. I guess you would call it either these like type of forums, like this Elite Agenda forum, which we saw here, or you could think of it like 8chan or 4chan or one of these, like, or Reddit maybe. Well, Reddit's like, 4chan light, I guess, but I've never been to any of those websites, 4chan, Reddit, or 8chan. I don't even know how you would get to them. I just know from reporting I see about them. There have been people who've guessed what forum I am familiar with, and I don't feel like, if someone asks it in the comment, how about this? If someone asks it in the comment box, I'll answer it, but otherwise, I'm just going to let that be for now. But this Elite Agenda, at the time, back in 2013, when I started working on this, there was something called the Tea Party, and then I called this the Elite Agenda, which is the same initials T, but it's like totally opposite meaning of what the Tea Party was, so that was kind of funny. But all right, I don't know that I'm even going to get through this entire book tonight. Maybe I'll do it again next Sunday, because we're only up to chapter 2. So chapter 2, there's Novotel. You haven't met him yet, but there he is. There's a Shadow Mare. This is Angelo Ramont. He's only in one chapter, but he's an important character. And this is Jekyll Corp Tower, which is run by Coda Hall. And this is obviously Earth. And this is Novatel's Electris. Well, I'm giving a lot away as I say this, you can kind of think of this like how Jedis have these like, you know, finger sparks, but in Noatel's case, they're illusionary. Like that's his talent. He creates illusions by manipulating light. He basically can make people see things that don't exist. But they do exist, but they exist only in their in the data that gets picked up by the human eye. They're not actually there. I guess hologram would maybe be kind of a word for it. Um, a word that might make sense. I'm not sure it's actually scientifically accurate, but you get the point from that word. Um, and then this is kind of a hint too to the very last thing revealed in the book, which I'll get to that at the end. I'll mention why that's a hint. But the fact that it's actually all here. It's all here. Angelo represents, you know, the humans, and his name is Angelo because there's also the angels. Some of them have lost their way, some of them haven't. His name is Vermont because he's trying to repair. This, the Shadow Mares, basically demons. They have this jewelry, which indicates that they've been back at the original time of the pyramids, which we already said matches the current technology. This is the current technology is represented by Coda Hall, who owns basically, it's kind of like Google, what he owns. But then his logo is a reference to this other thing he has, which is this human network. So he has both the technology network and the human network. And then Noatel is doing something sort of magical, and it's hitting Jekyll Corp Tower with the world in between. Noatel's like above the world, and there's the world, and there's the tower, and that's kind of exactly the story here. They're creating, based on that Tesla design, they're creating this illusionary matrix using these towers across the entire world, and the last one, they can't close the network unless they get a Jekyll Corp Tower. So, and then Noatel is the one who is doing that, similar to that in the ancient times when these Shadow Mares were more in charge. So is Noatel a good angel, a fallen angel, a recovered angel? This book is kind of Noatel's story. I know that not everyone realizes that. Like, some people think it's John Parr's story. Some people think it's Coda Hall's story. But I'm the author, and I'm telling you this book is Noatel's story. There'll be other books that'll have more John Parr, more Noatel. I think the second book was actually going to be Ariel's story. If I ever finish that. I'm going to have to grab a glass of water in a minute. Just checking also my emails just to see if anyone's coming. All right. No, doesn't look like it. All right, so what are we up to? Chapter 2, Elite Agenda. What is this one about? Oh, okay. This one is about all the construction. So they're doing the construction right under people's eyes, but they've got an excuse. Every time there's like something happens, they've got an excuse for it. And the people doing this, they're meeting right in Malta. And that's where the last holdout is, and that's where Shadow Mares can get to the surface because they come through. They have these old caves that go down for several levels and have this work in them, like this like ancient statues and ancient carvings. Some people call it Phoenician. It's like prehistoric. It's very old. 1 second. I gotta get that water bottle. There's also the Goddess Temple in Malta. There's references to that being based on Ariel, and that kind of makes sense when you see in the story what Noatel and Ariel goes through, and the position that Noatel's left without her. it kind of makes sense that if he showed up on Malta that he made some temples honoring her. But it's actually more than that. You'll see when we get to that chapter. All right, so this guy represents basically those elites who are working with shadow mares to build the network, and he goes through the plan. Again, this is so much like things we see in the modern news. He's like basically going through all these plans, and they all kind of work the same way. Scare the hell out of people, get them to do something, then exploit them after they do it. And it's like, I guess it tells you where I was coming from when I wrote this book. I guess things seemed kind of dark at the time. To me, they seem like they're getting lighter now, but to other people, they think that things are getting darker now, but I would say no, things are getting more exposed now. Things were always dark. You're just seeing them now, and that's a good sign, because that's how you make progress. It's like the first step is you see what the hell is going on. So those shadow mares were talking to those leaders. This guy's named Moran, and they're talking about how Coda Hall screwed up their plans. They think it's accident. It's Coda Hall steps ahead of them. It's not an accident. And then we jump to the first flashback, and you could see this is Noatel, this is Ariel, this is Shadow Mares. You don't really know them yet, but you're gonna see them as we move along, and this is gonna make more sense. But basically, they have some pyramid plans here, and they're talking about building a network, and that network is basically the same network that they're building here, but they're building it with, you know, at a different time using different technology. And Noatel and Ariel, they're familiar with it because they've already been cast out. I would have to go to like the last page of the book to show you, but they've already been cast out of a world that had this. So to them, it's like, yeah, no problem. We can like do this for you, you know, and they're gonna get something in exchange, which is basically they're gonna be the gods of this world, because they're gonna have control of that tower. So that shows them building it. Now we got the first sort of hero, this Angelo Vermont. He's got everything. You know, he's like successful politician. He's got money. He's got family. He's got everything. He's already achieved everything, which means he has everything. Control person who attempts it. And I'm just gonna, there's some really good lines here from Angelo. I suggest that you read this second chapter. It's really good stuff. About maybe how the world works. At one point, this guy screams to him like, this is a good panel. He says like, you're gonna steal Coda's building like you're criminals, and Moran tells them, we're not criminals. Criminals break the law. We don't break the law. We write the law. Do your job, Vermont. And then Vermont makes his speech about how, F you, I'm not doing that. I don't care. This wasn't worth it. I don't like being at the top of the world. I want the world to be a good place for everybody. I'm paraphrasing. Read this chapter to see his real words, but basically the next page he gets killed. Shadow Mare can't take it anymore. He, you know, starts killing the people who were, you know, providing security, and runs into this room and literally kills Vermont. And then he kills Moran too. Why am I not seeing that? Oh, because we jumped to a flashback. I guess before he actually kills them, but he busts into the room here. And then we go to the flashback. This is now only the second flashback, and they've turned on the relay grid. You can think of it as the Matrix if you want. It's a relay grid. It's like real science, but You can just think of it as the matrix if that's easier. And from that matrix, everyone sort of develops their powers, or let's say focuses their power. These are things that they could already do, but now they can do them on a large and global scale because of this relay grid. And the reason they don't have like tons of powers each is because it takes their mental focus. They have to have something, they have to be like, one guy's a plumber, another guy's an electrician. So it's like these are what they've picked to be good at. But the fact that they have the keys to the grid makes them incredibly good at those things. All right, so they built the tower. Basically, Noatel's gift to Ariel. A lot of these are kind of like biblical themes, like there's a lot of people in the Bible who will like do crazy things to impress their wives or the people that they hope will marry them. And then something, bad happens. In this case, Noatel destroys the world unintentionally. So back in the main timeline, and Angelo's dead. And then on the next page, Moran is dead. And then some reporter who looks like a young Megyn Kelly says that they died in a plane wreck. Because isn't that how it always happens? Everyone's always like, they're in a plane wreck, or they're suicide, or they're in like a single car accident or something like that. It's like these people just disappear. So while these people trying to save the world are killed, we then go to the old timeline and we see Noatel has ascended to godlike status as a result of building this grid, which looks like this Mayan temples and this Indian temples and this Egyptian pyramids. He kind of built this grid along the whole world. I might have to stop the stream because I'm just coughing too much. I'm sorry. All right, chapter 3. I'll probably stop in an hour. I'll put a bookmark in and we'll finish next week. So here's a pretty cool page. So here's the end of chapter 2, and it's got flying above the world with the grid turned on. You can see the grid around the world, and his head is kind of in front of an eclipse, which is also, it could be, eclipses happen, or it could be the black sun. You can probably decide for yourself on that one. And then, so here's Noatel approaching the circle, kind of making a halo around his head at the end of chapter 2, and then we go to the cover of chapter 3, and now we have Noatel diving down into this kind of Antikythera device that's underwater. So he's flying to the solar and outer space, and he's diving to the technology underwater. So this is in the main timeline, but you can sort of see where things must have went in the thousands of years in between them. Another Elite Agenda page. What's this one about? Oh, Jekyll Corp. Yeah, there's a lot going on at Jekyll Corp. So, Annandale Comics logo, just a coincidence. It's actually the game of life, the computer programming. It's R pentamino. One spark in a very small set of rules produces the signal. This is actually how it works. So, this speech here is being given by Coda Hall, and the backdrop changes from page to page. This first backdrop is kind of like, well, the book is called Electromagnate, and it's kind of like electromagnetic, gravitational, magnetosphere. I don't know. I'm just sort of throwing out words, but you can see from the pictures what we're going for here. It's a binary language, a small set of rules, produces the signal. this is recursion, the recursive universe. You basically, the fundamental theorem is the thing cannot be off and on at the same time. I know they try to teach the opposite of that now with this like quantum sparks and all this stuff. Uh, in my opinion, that's bullshit. It maybe it's not bullshit, but there isn't a world unless there's a way to start logic. And the way to start logic is that something can't be on and off at the same time. A cannot be both A and not A at the same time. Like all of mathematics derives from previous formulas plus that first formula, but that first formula you have to accept. So this current, Schrodinger cat theory or whatever, it's like alive and not alive at the same time, and then it becomes multiverses. This is a way to prevent truth from locking in. Because if it must be off or on, and you have rules of how it moves, then it can build bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and until it's like whatever, the universe. And then inside of there, I'm calling it the signal, but it's basically how the world renders in your own brain, if you want to look at it that way. And this is why one person's a king and another person's a pauper, because the king sees himself riding in a horse-drawn carriage, and the pauper sees himself riding on a subway, but they're both bumpy, they're both smell bad, they're both noisy. They're not that much different. And it's really like that. Like, if you want to think of yourself as a king, I mean, nobody's probably going to call you king, but if you've got Wi-Fi, if you've got McDonald's, if you've got dollar store, I mean, a lot of the world is how you perceive the world, and that's what's going on in these pages. It's a speech being made by Coda Hall. I'm going to flip through it in a minute, but I think it's important to mention that the first thing written, when this was written, it wasn't even in comic book form yet. It was in text form. There was some lady, she wrote Twilight, and she did it on some website. I forget what that website even was, but like I read the article, and they were like, oh, she sold 50 million copies of this book, but she started by writing on this website. So then I went to that website like the next minute, and I started writing. And I had no plan, but this was what I wrote. I just was like starting from nowhere. And then I wrote a few chapters, which was basically became Electromagnate. But then I thought, like, why this as like text? Like, do I like textbooks? Like, there should be more to the book. There should be pictures at least. So it kind of became a comic book along the way. But this speech, which is given by Coda Hall in the book, was the first thing that I wrote. So there's Noetel and the electromagnetics of Earth. There's world history, went through it pretty quickly. And there's the modern, technology. So there's the fundamental physics of the universe, there's world history, and there's modern technology. So there you go, 3 pages in Noetel's little speech. And then there's also symbolism, because that's one of the themes of the book. I think a lot of people talk about symbolism. I know it was in the Dan Brown books. I don't want to get too, tied up in symbolism, but it's convenient. I mean, you can help to set the stage by putting the right symbols on the page. And now, here's Noetel. Now he shows up in the main timeline. He's a bum. He's sitting here among the garbage. So in the previous page, in the timeline, he was a god. And now, in this modern timeline, he's a bum. But in the middle, we had this discussion about metaphysics and how things are what you perceive them. He lost his wife in in the old timeline. I'm sort of getting ahead of the story, but I'm just telling you, he built that. He built that timeline. He built that relay matrix for his wife. Then he lost his wife, and now he's a bum. By the way, he literally lost his wife. She's actually still alive. He just didn't find her yet, and it's been like 5,000 years. And he has kind of some lame excuses that he was going to get to it, but this is one of the things about being an immortal is some people think like the gods don't care about us, they aren't listening to us. One of the problems is that 5,000 years is not a lot of time for a god, and you might end up with a lot of time on your hands without any support. I'm not saying that officially, I'm not saying that religiously, but think about it. I mean, it might happen. Things might. There's a song, Johnny Cash famously sung it. It's like, you can run on for a long time, but sooner or later, God's going to cut you down. Yeah, something like that. Things might go one way for a while, but God's going to get to it. It's not going to be like that forever. So here's John Parr. He's named after John Paraso Diolet, who was the 49th Grand Master of the Knights of Malta. He's the main character in the book 700 Nights. This Electromagnate and 700 Nights are both set in Malta. But there was an odd coincidence that my name happens to be John Rapp. His name happens to be John Parr. You just swap the P and the R, and John Rapp looks at John Parr, and everyone thinks that he's my avatar in the book, and he's not. But there's no way to shake that. All right. So, who shows up on the very next page? We got Noatel and John Parr on one page, and then we have Mr. Nobody on the next page. This is the guy who kills the Kraken in the end. Spoiler alert. So anyway, this guy's really nobody. He's never given a name in the book. He never really does anything. But he always kind of in the right place at the right time. And he's actually going to tie into the book Neanderthal Rising. But I'll leave that till later because that book's not finished yet. It's one other thing from this page. Noatel, the wall behind them says Tesla. And that's there because Tesla, if you can think about it, was rediscovering the science that Noatel had built on Earth, the technology. But there was a weird thing that happened. And I never heard of gematria till, let's say, years after this book was released. I don't know how many years, let's say 5 years. Someone like put a link to a website and I looked at it and I typed in a bunch of words. And one of them was Noatel because he's the main person in this book, and out popped Tesla. And I thought like, oh, it's really weird that the main character would show up and I would put a word with the same gematria right behind them. And I wondered if you read into this and you put in other names from the book, and I was doing it and they were all coming out. And I thought about Malta because that's where this is set. So I put Malta in, and the gematria that came out was pandemic, which was interesting because in the very first scene in the book, this Moran is giving all these ideas of how to herd the entire Earth, and they all like fear-based kind of things. None of them are pandemic, but the book is set in Malta, and it implies gematria, even though I never heard of it. And Malta gematria is the pandemic. So anyway, here's John Parr. He's reading a website. He's criticizing Coda Hall's plan for creating these like internet AI versions of people. So that was that formula I was talking about. Coda Hall comes up with a plan. John Parr is on forums. He breaks it. He breaks the plan using logic. This guy, this nobody guy, he challenges Noatel. Noatel walks off to the sunset. John Parr sees one of the angels. Noatel, Ariel. I want to say he's like, I'm embarrassed that I don't remember his name right now. He's like very important character. I want to say Raphael, but I know that's not correct. Okay. All right, let's just go to the front and see what his name is. Michael. Oh my goodness. Yeah, of course this is Michael. So this is Michael. So he worked with Noatel in the past. And he's got kind of a bad reputation, as you see here. They're calling him like Diablo when he shows up at this mining site. But basically, this mining site is kind of like releasing him. I don't know exactly where he was at this point, but he came out of the mine. So the gang's getting back together. We now have Noatel was always on Earth. He never left. Michael was in the Earth, and now he's come out. You see him grabbing this guy's foot like a zombie. He's also throwing him because he's really big. The miner's drill bent. Something crazy in there, and it's Michael. And here's Noatel. There's Jekyll Tower in the back, and he's going for a swim. Goes for a swim. We see some of the ancient technology buried underwater. We go to more flashbacks of Noatel. So by Roman times, he was already in hiding. See, he has the toga over his suit. He's hiding behind a rock. Greek and Roman times. So he's been in hiding for a while. But here he is, underwater, himself again. His godlike self. Because these wings, they work. Even though when the relay grid is up, these wings work like worldwide and instantaneously, but even when the grid is not up, they still work like, let's say, I don't know. I didn't really define it in the book, but let's say within a 5 or 10 meter radius around his person. So he can still fly. He can still maintain his health. He can still nourish himself. He can still be, have a force field protecting him. Like everything that these wings do, they'll still do for him. But without the grid, they're not going to be, like worldwide powerful. But the grid is being rebuilt, remember? And there's Coda. There's Coda's building. So we're going up to Coda. He's still giving a speech. And as you can see, what he's telling them here, these are instances of Noatel. You could say that they're not, but they sure look like they are. It was like Zeus and Merlin and who's this one? Moses, Zeus, Odin, Merlin, Moses. There's probably others. There's like, I guess you'd call it an archetype of these like magical, bearded, white-haired people. And that's kind of what Noatel is. So, is it like coincidence that they have the same powers that he has? Or is it like, because he's been there for a few thousand years. So yeah, a lot of this, it's kind of, if you watched Ancient Aliens, this is old news, but at the time I wrote it, they were cool ideas. So we're back at, we're basically going back and forth from Coda's meeting with his people to Noatel's sort of reminiscence underground. Now we got some bots that Noatel is building. And then this is probably the most mysterious thing in the book. And it implies that there's something which hasn't been revealed. It also could be a coincidence. But Noatel's Coda Hall, who's living in modern times, or let's say 10 years in the future, is building the wings that Noatel and his buddies wear that make them godlike. Now, he's already rebuilding the grid. like the pyramid grid from ancient history, prehistory. Code is part of rebuilding that as technology. So it's not that crazy to think that he's just reinventing the wheel here, but it's actually going to be more than that. And these are literally those wings, but that doesn't get revealed in this book. All right, so it's been over an hour. We're up to chapter 4. So I guess now is the time when I put a bookmark in here. I don't know what this is. Rancho Obi-Wan, Queen Amidala. Oh, it says Little Debbie. Some Queen Amidala card that I pick up next Sunday. All right. So I'm going to close the stream now. Bye.